You're listening to the Fusion Patrol Podcast.
Hello and welcome to another podcast episode of Fusion Patrol. I'm Eugene.
And I'm Ben.
And we're back talking about Sapphire and Steel again this week. This time we're going to be looking at their second adventure, an 8-part story, continuing on from, well, it's not really continuing on, but continuing on from our podcast of a couple weeks ago on adventure number 1. So you're still a newbie on Sapphire and Steel.
Quite.
How did you think of this episode compared to the first one?
Well, I went into this one with certain expectations. I remember you had said that the second episode was regarded as one of the best of the series.
That's my understanding. Yes.
I went in very optimistic because I really enjoyed the entire first story. This one I found it quite different. It had a lot of story to tell, and at times I found it, maybe because it was 8 parts, I found it to be almost a bit like overload. But one of the things that I did notice about it, while the first one was a ghost story sort of wrapped in science fiction wrapping, this one really had a very little sci-fi aspect of it all. This one really felt more supernatural than anything else.
That's an interesting point. In this, clearly, Sapphire states that ghosts are real, that they're real phenomena, and that it's just that they are incapable of interacting with our world unless something stirs them up. I guess that's not quite the right word. It's not getting them stirred up. You need some sort of external force to get them to come into our world. And so I guess we could call it a supernatural phenomena, but it's definitely, they're really ghosts. They're not echoes or anything like that. These characters that we meet are, in fact, ghosts.
Right.
It's interesting from my point of view. I have heard that this is one of the better episodes, and, from here, there, and yonder. And my recollection from having, watched them all several years ago, when the DVD set first came out, was that, looking back on them, this is one of the more memorable ones. But when I watched it this time, I'm not sure that I would have said it was better than the previous episode. I liked it, and there certainly were parts about it that were really quite clever, but I'm not sure that it was as tight as the first story was with regards to what was happening. I think it was a little too long. Just kind of odd when you look at it a little more critically, or perhaps on the second viewing, that I wasn't as thrilled with it. I still enjoyed it, but just a little different from what my memory tells me.
Well, that's sort of how I felt when I was watching it. I came in with certain expectations, having just seen the first one. There was all this expectation about it being such a really, really strong episode. And I'm with you. While I didn't dislike it, I felt maybe just a tiny bit let down, because I thought the first episode, you used all the same words that I would have used regarding the first episode. I found the storytelling to be really, really tight. What was that? 6 parts? The first one?
Yes, it was 6 parts.
6 parts, I think, is an adequate amount of time to tell a story. I think with 8 parts, they started introducing elements which, at times, in terms of storytelling, it got a little unfocused. And at one point, I just got downright confused on one element where I think Sapphire now you'll have to forgive me because I saw this episode just a few weeks back, just before I went on vacation.
Yes, you were all there sipping Mai Tais on the Gold Coast of the Indian Ocean there on the beaches of Virginia. I've heard all about it in your tweets.
Actually, it's not quite true. No, we were just watching the waves on the beach of North Carolina. But in any event, some of my memory is a bit fuzzy on this. I did have too many wine coolers. But there's a bit where I think Sapphire takes them all back. Some 24 hours, I think it is. I'm not sure.
Yeah.
And then at one point, the elderly gentleman who we first meet at the very beginning of this story, they hear his what seems like a disembodied voice, and then all of a sudden he just appears on the staircase. And that one just left me completely dumbfounded. And that's the kind of storytelling that went on here. I realized it did a great job at creating more of a ghost story type mood, but it didn't. As far as studying this story from a critical standpoint, it made it rather confusing.
Okay, I'll go along with that. There's a lot more in this story that just was not explained, and I know we've talked about that before. How I don't necessarily need or want everything to be explained, and I think that it sort of lends to the feeling that when they fixed it, it was a Band-Aid. But just there. Let me just take a moment here for the listeners who. I'll warn you now, this is the plot synopsis part. Real briefly, Sapphire and Steel appear at a disused train station. And there is a ghost hunter there by the name of Tully, an old man who's trying to, using the old bell book and candle techniques and tape recorders to try to record EVP, I think it is. And Sapphire and Steel are there because there's a disturbance, and the disturbance are ghosts. And there are various people who have, typically from war, who are coming back, and they've got to get rid of them. And the ghosts are being stirred up by something, which is referred to nothing more than the darkness. And the darkness lives on regret. And that's basically, it's the investigation trying to figure out what the ghosts want, what the ghosts are doing. The ghosts are attacking them in, I'm guessing, the only way they can. And in the end, when they solve the problem, it's, like I was just saying, it's almost like, well, that's good enough. They don't actually really solve it. They just patch it up enough that they can leave. And so I think a lot of the storytelling where things aren't making sense, I don't think they actually make sense to Sapphire and Steel. I think they're just kind of rolling with the punches. Stuff comes in, we don't exactly know what's going on here, but, you know, the basic goal is we have to get rid of the ghosts. And this is a very interesting point to me. Their job appears to be to get rid of the ghosts, not to get rid of the darkness. Because they don't get rid of the darkness. They just get rid of the ghosts, and they're like, good enough. Job done.
They, without saying too much at this early in the podcast, the means in which they satisfy
the darkness. That's right.
And the means in which they did it, I thought was, wow, I didn't see that one coming.
Steel is not a nice guy. Let's put it that way. Steel is, he's not a guy. I mean, he's some sort of a thing.
Sapphire wasn't too nice in this one either.
No, and I think we saw that in the last episode too. Steel was the hard, unyielding, unsympathetic one. Sapphire plays sympathetic, but she isn't either. She's just as determined as Steel is, and just as dead, but she has the skill of being the diplomat, and so she comes off. You know, she doesn't stop Steel in the end. She just is not happy about it. You know, but but it has to be done, and it is done.
Right.
So anyway, which is probably getting towards the end of it a little bit too much, but so
we can reveal that all later.
Yeah, or not, but we'll leave some for the imagination of the viewers who want to watch it, or in the end. But I thought, we have the ghosts. We have ghosts from World War I. We have ghosts from World War II. We have ghosts from sort of military peacetime events, and they've all come back, and what they can do they're being stirred up by this darkness. It's promising them things that it can't give them, but they don't know that. And they can attack Sapphire and Steel and the ghost hunter Telly by letting them experience their death, letting them experience bits of their lives. And it's really quite sad. I mean, these ghosts they're here because of their resentment. They've been stirred up because of their resentment. And Sapphire and Steel are very clear. Young men die in war. That's expected. You can't come back as a ghost because of that. It has to be a lot more than just, oh gosh, I was young and I went off to war and I died. How tragic. It has to be. Yeah, it has to be worse than that. And these guys are all worse. The private from the Great War is, he keeps repeating the numbers 11, 11, 11, 11. And to any historian, history buff, or even passing, the Great War ended on November 11th at 11 a.m. That's when they signed the armistice papers. And the extra 11 that this guy puts on there is that he was killed 11 minutes after the armistice was signed, because of a mistake that was made. And that's really his resentment. It wasn't that he was killed in war. It was that he was killed in peacetime by accident. There is a World War II fighter pilot who, and we never find out why, nobody wants to fly with him. I mean, we keep seeing scenes of his life where he comes in and he's talking about, I've only got one more mission, sir, and as my squadron have all bought it, so obviously everyone in his squadron is dead, he's the last survivor, and he's got one more mission to fly, and so he's going around to all the other squadrons, and it's like, I understand you are 2 pilots down. Could I fly a mission with you? And they're all, turning him down. And I don't know if that's because he's walking around with a teddy bear, which is very strange, whether that's his good luck charm, or whether that's supposed to be telling us something about his personality. I don't know. That's he's really he's really the stereotypical British
fighter jock.
Yeah, the flap that Barney over the briny, banter from Monty Python you barely can understand kind of thing, sort of Biggles, but. And so he finally gets to fly a mission in a junky old plane, and then his plane gets shot, and of course he dies because he can't open the cockpit on the way down. And I shouldn't laugh, but I mean that's there's a group of, in any case, they're all particularly sad, regretful deaths, and I don't put any store in the notion of ghosts or afterlife, but nonetheless, it's a very powerful illusion that I think every person is susceptible to, that you attribute dead people's consciousness to continuing on. Whether you believe it really does continue on or whether you don't believe it, but it's a very powerful feeling. Even I feel it when you look at this, and you just can't help think, gosh, the dead must be really thinking back, that really sucked, and that makes it sad for some reason to me. I mean, it not I'm going to weep and cry kind of sad, but I mean, it's just it's very powerful from a storytelling standpoint. Mm-hmm. That sets the mood. A lot of this story is you feel sorry for the ghosts in a way. Sapphire and Steel's job is just to get rid of them, Steel is an absolute jerk throughout this whole. I mean, he's a jerk to the ghosts. He's particularly a jerk to the old Tully, who's this nice old misguided man, ghost hunter, who's, you know, he just wants to help the ghosts. I mean, he's very sympathetic to them. He wants to communicate with them. He wants to help them find rest. He's just this kind, gentle old man. And Steele just keeps co-opting him into doing things to anger the ghosts. He's dismissive of the guy. He insults him. He makes him want to go away, and then he realizes he's useful to him from time to time, and brings him back. It's a tour de force for David McCallum to be a jerk throughout this episode.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things I wanted to talk about is what did you think of the sets and the atmosphere that they create in this one? We last time we talked about how, you know, the lonely, isolated, I guess, lighthouse or house on the coast, and, you know, very few sets, very limited special effects. How did you think this one was?
Well, clearly this was significantly different than in the first one. Even though in the first story, while it was set in an isolated house and there were a lot of old furniture, there was still something very warm, almost kind of nurturing about it, which made that story even more interesting. It's a deserted train station, very empty, very dark lighting, dust, cobwebs. A lot of things that you would expect to find in a ghost type story.
I would so love to believe it deep in my heart. I would so love to believe that in 1979 it was possible that there was a disused train station somewhere in Britain that still had tables and chairs just knocked over, and the fixtures were in, and it had just been boarded up and people had left it, and that vagrants and vandals hadn't torn it apart. But it was a little difficult from my standpoint now to say there is no way you could have left this station, could be abandoned like that, because people would have, if not destroyed it just to be jerks, then they would have stolen all the tables and chairs, or they'd have graffitied the walls, or they'd have, you know, said, "Ha ha, wouldn't it be funny if I took a big poo on top of all the tables," as people would do now. But looking at 1979, I kind of like got, you know, I don't think that's true in 79, maybe 59, and maybe even that's my imagination. But I would like to think that train station is out there somewhere right now.
Yeah, it'd be kind of fun to go in there, at least for history's sake. It did, again, make for a very interesting setting. The fact that it was, for the sake of the story, a rather large station. There was, you have your big platform. You have this, I guess, some sort of a bridge, a walkway.
Yeah, you've typically got a walkway on a train station. It either goes under the tracks or over the tracks so that you can get on the, you know, like if it's an east-west train, you can get on the eastbound line or the westbound line rather than walk across the track. So there's a crossover.
So it made for a very interesting setting. Again, that helps for the sake of this ghost story, and I guess rooms, which
was a hotel attached to it, a railway hotel.
Yeah, I guess that. I guess it was a hotel. So you have this very empty space. Perfect when you want to tell a ghost story, especially if you're sort of doing a departure from your first story, which, again, was really sort of a supernatural science fiction, and just really going for a classic ghost story this time around. You don't want something that looks kind of cozy and warm. You want something that looks maybe a bit cold, very empty, with lots of shadows, so you really can't see everything that's going on. You don't know what might be hiding in the shadows, that kind of stuff.
And, of course, the villain is the darkness. So, you know, it's a corner of a dark place, gets a little darker till you notice it right away.
Right.
I thought they were very effective in you're right, it's a cold, Specifically, it's October, I believe. It's winter, and a lot of the ghostly manifestations for the World War I private occurred in summer when he went off to war. And so when he manifests himself, even though we don't really see much of a difference, the characters, particularly Sapphire, is like, can you smell the flowers? And it's warm.
It's a warm June day.
It's a warm June day, she kept saying, or warm summer's day, and they could smell flowers. And flowers would appear on the platform, just in the planters that were along the platform, and that would tell you that there was something ghostly happening whenever those flowers would reappear. It was very effective. I mean, they didn't have to do anything to try to simulate a warm summer day other than just do a little crossfade in the camera to putting flowers on the station, and they lit them up a little bit, and then just had the characters say it's a and I bought it. I mean, it's still nighttime. That's the whole point. It's a cold night, and yet the characters are like, this is anomalous in its way. So once again, they did a great job with very little money.
Production value.
Yeah.
I mean, there wasn't a lot of visual effects. You really didn't need it. Much like you didn't need it with the. In fact, I think with this story, you actually needed them less. I think the biggest cost was the set and the cast of extras.
Yeah, they were kind of big for this one.
Yeah, a lot of extras for all the restless ghosts that were upset about being cut down in life a little too soon.
Well, let's talk a little bit about the problem itself. So, Sapphire Steel appear to be there to get rid of the ghosts. There is this thing which they make absolutely no explanation or even hazard a guess as to what the darkness is. The darkness is just there bringing out the ghosts. And
I kind of assumed, and again, this comes from just having seen the first episode or the first story.
But the darkness was the time distortion or whatever it is.
Or whatever it is that, whatever intelligence it is that roams the corridor of time,
right,
looking for weaknesses to get in. And I kind of get the feeling that that's the darkness that they're referring to. Whether that's true or not, I have no idea.
I mean, there's no discussion of the time corridor or this nameless creature, but what you could interpret is that the darkness is bringing the ghosts, and the ghosts, by coming forward, are the time distortion. So, get rid of the ghosts, you get rid of the time distortion, the darkness, and satiate the darkness so that he doesn't bring more ghosts forward.
Right.
I don't know. It has a different. I got through to the end of it. I realized, they really weren't concerned as much about the darkness as they were about the ghosts, and they were positive that the ghosts were evil.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, not even the way we would think, like the ghosts themselves are villains and therefore they're evil. They are evil because they are time distortions. Just their existence is evil, but it's them that's evil. That's kind of an odd, and again, since they don't really explain it, and they really just throw a lot, like all the attacks for the ghosts. I mean, for several episodes, the ghosts are just forcing them to relive their deaths or trying to show them things about, and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense.
No, I never could figure out exactly what. Okay, yes. So as we said earlier, they're upset at being so cut down,
and it's trying to make them more upset.
Right, but that hardly seemed like a motivation for them to attack in the manner that they were. I couldn't quite figure out why Why were they behaving the way that they were?
I think that they were trying to get rid of Sapphire and Steel because they knew Sapphire and Steel were trying to get rid of them. And
That'd be the only thing.
And they say that the darkness, eventually we find out, the darkness has promised them new lives. And that's what they want. They want new lives. And so Sapphire and Steel are an obstacle. Whether or not the darkness said, hey, those two are a problem, or whether they just immediately knew it because Sapphire and Steel arrive and start stirring up the hornet's nest, I don't know. And I don't think we will know. There is one fascinating piece later in the story where they give the darkness something that will satiate it, and what they need is regret. It wants regret. It needs regret from these poor soldiers, and so Steel says, "Well, I'll give you even bigger regret. I'll give you something that will cause time itself to have regrets. This will, change causality, and it will upset. It may even upset. I think his words. It may even upset higher powers."
Well, you just threw out a line that really made me again question what the whole purpose of Sapphire and Steel is, and that is, I will give you something that will make even time regret. Well, boy, that doesn't seem like you're really solving a problem. It sounds like you're only going to make it worse.
Yes, it does, except that they get rid of the ghosts, which are the time anomalies.
Yeah, so great. You're taking care of – you put a little tiny – what you think is a Band-Aid on a current problem, but you're setting the stage for what may be an even larger problem down the road. Whether the series goes in that direction or not, I have no idea. But that's what I was getting out of it as a viewer.
It's very ambiguous. I mean, at the end of the story – in the end of time, it's very ambiguous what's going on. The best I can say is that there are no easy answers in this particular episode when you get done. No,
there's not. But the one thing that I did walk away from is I didn't like the quote-unquote solution.
No,
I found that highly disturbing.
It wasn't very nice. I guess so. This is your spoiler alert. Another spoiler alert for
big spoiler alert.
Big spoiler alert. Throughout this story, I think we've mentioned there is the character of Tully, and he's an old man. He's like 52 years old, and at one point, Sapphire does a scan of him to make sure that he's actually a person and not a ghost. Which is interesting that Sapphire and Steel have to go into that detail to differentiate a human from a ghost. But they do. And, Sapphire runs a scan and, this, that, and the other. Life expectancy, 57.3 years. And later in the story, Steel makes a comment about Tully's age. He says, no, you said he lived to 57.3 years. And he phrases it in such a way that it's not life expectancy. It's recorded history. It's what happened. Tully dies at 57.3. Sapphire is not reading his guesstimate of when he'll live. Sapphire was looking at his actual death. And in the end, and he's a nice guy, but it's a lovely character because it is one of the many. He is sort of a lot of the people I've met, the sort of misguided ghost hunter sort of people who firmly believe this stuff and watch taps on TV and believe every word of it and genuinely are there looking and believing it and not not for their self-aggrandizement but because they genuinely want to help. And he's a nice, kindly old gentleman, and he tries to help Sapphire and Steel, particularly Sapphire because she's nicer to him. Steel kind of coerces him into doing a lot of stuff throughout the course of the episode, and he's terrified. I mean, he sees so many terrible things and comes close to death, and he's terrified. He's wetting himself. He's so scared, and yet he sticks with them all the way to the end, and basically Steel gives him to the darkness. Says, okay, go kill this guy. And he's not supposed to die for 5 years. That will cause time itself to have regrets.
Right.
And you can't tell for sure, but after Steel makes that deal, and after Sapphire's like, you can't give him Tully, and Steel says, yeah, it's the only way. And then Sapphire's like, yeah, all right. Tully's at the top of the stairs. And we're not sure, but from his demeanor, I think he heard them. That he heard them saying what they were going to do. And he's like, how are we doing? And so we're okay, Mr. Tully. Go back and wait in the tunnel. And it's like, are we winning? Yes, we're winning. Please go wait in the tunnel. All right, well, I'll be off then. And he kind of wanders off and then screams as he dies. And that is the solution. It's pretty nasty.
It's pretty grim.
But, two way to look at it, did he actually know that was coming and he sacrificed himself anyway to help those ghosts? Or
again, we don't know.
Or did he just not hear that part of the conversation and just they brought him out there so that we could see how... Because Steel even looks a little regretful at that moment. That, well, would you please... he's not yelling at the guy, get back in the tunnel like I told you. He's... would you please go back? It won't be long now, kind of
right.
stuff. And also, so that's more or less the end of the episode. I think it's kind of interesting because Sapphire let him do it. Like I say, she could have put up more of an argument than she did. She's obviously not happy about it, and she just kind of, says the ghosts are gone. They do a little talking, and then she kind of just turns around in sadness and disappears when she leaves.
Yeah.
And Steel walks down. You think he's kind of a little subdued too, and he walks down the platform away from the camera. And just as he gets to the end of the platform, he takes a great big old skip step like he's all happy, and then he disappears.
Well, that's not what Oh, really? Okay, I kind of got something different out of that. I kind of got the feeling that they, up and away kind of thing.
Could be.
That's what I saw.
I think that's what I thought the first time I watched it, and I think the second time I watched it, I almost think that was jubilant on his part. Sapphire's disappearance was sad and regretful, and his was like, hey, job done.
I didn't get that. I got the feeling that they were just leaping through whatever time portal that they used to
she
pop
didn't
in
do
and
it.
out of our time.
I mean,
I thought I saw them both do it.
No, she just turned and faded right there on camera. She just turned away from him and gone. And then he walked off and did the jumpy thing.
Well, she can manipulate time. Maybe she didn't have to.
Yeah. So, I thought that was... all in all, I mean, I'd still recommend the episode, but it was definitely a little bit harder. And because it didn't have the benefit of them giving any explanation to anyone... like they did in the first episode to the little boy.
Right.
It's a little harder to come into this episode.
I would not recommend this as a first-time watch.
I think that's a reasonable... recommendation.
Yeah, this is not the kind of episode that you'd want to see as an introduction to Sapphire and Steel. I don't know what the rest of the series looks like, and I look forward to seeing them. But for now... if I wanted to introduce this series to anybody, I would still have to go to the first episode.
I think that's reasonable. I think this episode should have been 6 parts. I mean, second guessing the writer or the production company, but I think they did spend a whole lot of time with them sort of plundering around in the dark, or the ghosts doing attacks on them. That really didn't have any net effect. They didn't advance the plot other than we got to see a little bit of what the ghosts could do.
Well, I kind of got the feeling that it actually made the story a little bit more muddy.
Yeah, and there's a subplot in here where the World War I private apparently had a I'll put it in air quotes, a girlfriend, and they pull her back from death and channel her into Sapphire. So
through the means of a seance.
Through the means of a seance. And they try to get her to, they're trying to get his name. And it seems very important that they get his name. And once they get his name, it didn't really help. But they
that kind of seemed to be like hearkening back to maybe ideas and elements from the first series, where words had meaning. That
maybe
they were kind of borrowing from that idea, but again, this was a completely different situation. As we said in the first series, those were echoes, and these
are ghosts.
These were not echoes; these were real ghosts. So, whatever techniques Sapphire and Steel may have been accustomed to, which I kind of get the feeling that's what they drew upon for the first series, those had no bearing whatsoever in this. It's almost like, oh my God, we're dealing with ghosts. It's like even they didn't realize these were really going to be ghosts for the first time.
Yeah, I think
that threw them off.
I think that they don't know what's happening when they're put into an assignment, but that's kind of questionable. And I don't know that question will ever be answered either. So,
no. But in any case, channeling this old girlfriend.
Yeah, so they channel this old girlfriend, and we get scenes from her life, and to make a long story short, she's 12 years older than Private Sammy something.
She was a teacher.
She was his teacher. She was his teacher when he was a boy. And when he grew up, they had a little bit of a romance. And there's a sort of subplot there where they're talking about, that she's 12 years older than him. And it really doesn't matter once he grew up. It's 12 years isn't that big of a difference. And it doesn't really go anywhere.
It was a lot of unnecessary exposition.
It didn't seem to have any plot. Maybe that's something I don't get. And of course, it's a lot harder in this day and age. But I mean, I can tell you that my father's cousin and his wife, so they were married probably in the 40s, and she was 3 years older than him. And she spent her entire life, until he died, lying about her age. No one knew that she was 3 years older than him, because that was scandalous.
Well, I'm sure the whole idea of here's this young woman who was the teacher of this boy in school to all of a sudden become
that's even worse.
His girlfriend. I mean, yes, it is very scandalous, even by today's standards. But what does that do for the story overall? Nothing.
Nothing, really. I mean, the fact that he had a girlfriend, yes, because they use this sort of attitude of he lost out on a big romance, and that
right, and that can be the regret that he feels, but. And that's all that's really necessary to tell. I mean, the girlfriend could have been any age, and it would have made no difference to the overall story. I mean, just because she's older than him, how does that have any bearing on his regret?
I don't know. Well, I think that's just about it.
I don't think there's anything else we can say about it.
I'm pretty sure we beat this episode down to its knees. The one thing I say, if I were going to sum this up, sort of in how this story is, this story makes me sad. I mean, that's what comes to me out of this, is that these soldiers and their plight from the various different wars. And how they've, had a crummy life and a crummy death, if you will, and then they're exploited by the darkness, and that's sad. And of course, the solution to the story isn't particularly very happy.
That's what really bummed me up more than anything else was what they did to Tully.
Well, I think that's it for this time. Next couple weeks we'll be back with something else. I think we probably will leapfrog something else before we come back to another Sapphire and Steel. But until next time, keep watching the skies. Now, still haven't got that sign-off thing right. The au revoir sounds completely wrong when we're talking about World War I, because they're all getting shot up in France. It's probably wouldn't want to Salfie to saying because they were all being shot up in France by the Germans.
Just say cheers.
Cheers. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.
You've been listening to the Fusion Patrol podcast. We'd love to hear from you. You can reach us at feedback@fusionpatrol.com, or you can follow us on Twitter at twitter.com/fusionpatrol, or look for us on Facebook. Fusion Patrol is a production of Lone Locust Productions. Our theme music is Fight the Future by Amberwolf.